Hello, lovelies. Welcome back. Okay, so today we're going to talk about how to bind off. Let's go over what we've learned so far. We learned a long tail cast on. We learned the knit stitch. We learned to purl, and we learned how to do ribbing. We also learned to identify the difference between our knits and our purls. And now I'm going to show you how to bind off our work. When you bind off, you want to keep your bound off stitches loose so you don't end up with a tight edge. So see, I'm pulling on our cast on edge. See, it's nice and stretchy. You want your bound off edge also to be stretchy. And there are many different ways to cast on, and of course there are many different ways to bind off. I'm going to show you the most basic way to bind off. Our little swatch here has a pattern to it. It has our ribbing pattern. We have purl, purl, knit, knit, purl, purl, knit, knit, and so on across our row. So we are going to bind off in pattern. So what that means is, since my first two stitches are purls, I am going to purl the first two stitches. So here's stitch number 1, and over, through, and off. Here's stitch number 2, over, through, off. Now here's the binding off part. Now we have 2 stitches on our right hand needle. I'm going to insert my left hand needle into the first stitch on the right hand needle, and I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to leapfrog over the second stitch. So I'm going to pass the first stitch over the second stitch, and then we have 1. So now I'm looking at my swatch, and my next 2 stitches are knits. So that means I need to move my working yarn from the front of my work between the needles to the back of my work. And I'm going to knit the following stitch. I have 2 stitches on my needle again. And again, I'm going to take the tip of my left hand needle and I will insert it into the first stitch on the right hand needle and pass that stitch over the second stitch on the right hand needle. So leapfrogging it off. Let's do one more time. We knit, insert our needle, now we do the leapfrog over the stitch closest to the point. Now we have 2 purls again. So we're going to take our working yarn, go between the needle tips, and I'm going to purl and I have 2 stitches again. Now I'm going to take my left hand needle, insert it into this first stitch on the right hand needle, up over the tip, and leapfrog over. So, and you see what we have done? This here is the beginning of our bound off edge. We're going to continue binding off all the way across the row. So our following stitch is a purl, and I can tell because the bump is right up here against the needle. So we're going to purl. And now there's 2 stitches. Insert our needle into the first stitch and bring it up over the tip of our needle over the second stitch. If you look at how I'm doing this, notice I do not pull the working yarn tight after I leapfrog over, because that keeps my bound off edge nice and loose. And my next 2 stitches are knits, and I have my working yarn in the back of the work. So I'm going to knit the following stitch, insert my needle, and I'm going to leapfrog up and over. And so we're going to knit, through, off, insert my needle, and we're going to leapfrog up and over. Now I have 2 purls. I'm going to move my yarn between the needle tips to the front of my work. I'm going to purl the following stitch. I have 2 stitches. Insert my needle again. I'm going to leapfrog up and over. And we're going to continue this all the way across. So we have purl, insert our needle, leapfrog up and over. And then we're going to do our 2 knits. And leapfrog up and over. And knit 2. And leapfrog up and over. So this is binding off in pattern. What if your pattern is 3 purls and 2 knits? Well, same idea. You still are going to purl the purls and you are still going to knit the knits. The advantage to binding off in pattern is it gets, it looks a little bit more uniform up at the top. You see? It goes in and out a little bit. If these were all knits all the way across, you'd have like this turned row of V's that just goes straight across your work. Sometimes you don't want that and you want to sort of disguise and make it look like the fabric just ends and it doesn't have that row of V's across. So it's a little bit more decorative, I suppose, or it's a little more elegant of a finish to bind off in pattern. A lot of knitting patterns will ask you to bind off in pattern. So where are we here? We have 2 knits. Bring our yarn between the 2 needles to the back. And leapfrog up and over. Knit. And as you get better at this and feel more comfortable, of course, then you will go faster. And then a question we get a lot of the time at the shop is, well, what happens with that last stitch? Well, guess what? You treat the last stitch the same as any other stitch. And we are almost there. So we have 2 more knits. And then we have 2 more purls. Okay, and then here's our last stitch. So it's a purl, so we purl it. Okay, so I've got my last 2 stitches on the needle. Leapfrog up and over. I have 1 stitch left on my needle. Okay, so I have 1 loop left on my needle. So now what I do is I take my working yarn and I'm going to make a swoop over my needle. So I have my loop and my swoop. And the next step is I'm going to take my loop and bring it, leapfrog it over my swoop. And I have cut my yarn, leaving at least a 6-inch tail. And now I'm going to pull my loop all the way through, whoosh, just like that. And we can pull this snug, and that is all there is to it. Now we have bound off. So this is our learning swatch. And see, and then it's nice and stretchy, which is perfect. That's just what we want. So now you can take a look at your swatch. You can see your cast on edge, your garter stitch rows, your few rows of stockinette, our ribbing, and our lovely bound off edge. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and happy stitching!